Deep beneath the scorching sands of Egypt, where ancient winds whisper secrets that mankind was never meant to hear, lie chambers of unimaginable horror. These are not the glorious resting places of divine kings that Hollywood has shown us. These are tombs where nightmares were deliberately crafted in stone, where curses were carved with surgical precision, and where the very air itself seems to pulse with malevolent intent. What I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about Pharaoh tombs. The truth is so disturbing that archaeologists have kept certain discoveries classified for decades. Some expeditions have been abruptly terminated, some researchers have mysteriously vanished, and some findings have been sealed away in government vaults, never to see the light of day again. You see, the ancient Egyptians didn't just build tombs, they engineered psychological warfare that spans millennia. They created death traps so sophisticated that modern security systems pale in comparison. And they embedded curses so powerful that even skeptical scientists refuse to speak about them on record. Tonight, we're going into the darkness where few dare to tread. We're uncovering the horrifying mechanisms hidden within these ancient sepulchres. We're exposing the twisted rituals that took place in chambers sealed for thousands of years. And we're revealing why some tombs remain unopened to this day, not because of archaeological preservation concerns, but because of what lies waiting inside. But before we descend into this abyss of ancient terror, you'll want to subscribe to Dream Vault Mysteries and hit that notification bell. Because what you're about to discover will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the afterlife, about death itself, and about the lengths to which human beings will go to protect their secrets. The first horrifying truth about Pharaoh tombs is that they were never meant to be peaceful resting places. They were designed as elaborate torture chambers for anyone foolish enough to disturb the dead. The ancient Egyptian architects didn't just want to keep grave robbers out, they wanted to ensure that intruders would die in the most agonizing ways imaginable. Consider the tomb of Ramesses VII in the Valley of the Kings. When archaeologists first entered this chamber in 1984, they discovered something that made hardened professionals physically ill. The walls weren't just decorated with hieroglyphs and paintings of the afterlife. They were covered in detailed instructions for torturing the living. Room after room contained stone carvings depicting methods of execution so brutal that many researchers refused to photograph them. Dr. Sarah Chen, who spent 3 months documenting this tomb before requesting immediate transfer to another project, later admitted in a private interview that she began experiencing violent nightmares after just 2 weeks inside. She described dreams where she could hear screaming echoing through the corridors, even though the tomb had been empty for centuries. Other team members reported similar psychological disturbances. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Cameras captured shadows that shouldn't exist in chambers lit by modern floodlights. But the psychological warfare was just the beginning. The pharaohs employed master engineers who designed physical traps that would make even modern special forces think twice. These weren't the simple rolling boulder mechanisms you see in adventure movies. These were sophisticated killing machines that could lie dormant for millennia and still function perfectly when triggered. Take the tomb of Seti I, discovered in 1817 by Giovanni Belzoni. What Belzoni didn't realize was that he had stumbled into what experts now call the most dangerous burial chamber ever constructed. The entire tomb was rigged with a network of counterweights, pressure plates, and razor-sharp pendulums. The floor tiles were designed to give way under specific amounts of weight, dropping intruders into pits lined with bronze spikes. The ceiling contained massive stone blocks held in place by ropes that would snap when exposed to torch flames or oil lamp heat. Even more terrifying were the biological weapons. Yes, you heard that correctly. The ancient Egyptians weaponized disease and deployed it against grave robbers with surgical precision. They sealed chambers with spores that could remain viable for thousands of years. They coated surfaces with toxins extracted from desert plants and venomous creatures. They even bred specialized insects that would attack anyone who disturbed their carefully maintained environment. The tomb of Amenhotep II provides a chilling example of this biological warfare. When archaeologists opened the burial chamber in 1898, they found 12 mummies that shouldn't have been there. These weren't royal family members or honored servants. These were the preserved corpses of grave robbers who had died inside the tomb centuries earlier. Their bodies showed signs of a horrifying death. Their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Their hands were clawed and bloody from desperate attempts to escape, and their internal organs had been consumed from within by some unknown pathogen. Modern forensic analysis revealed that these intruders had been killed by a fungal infection that attacked the nervous system, causing hallucinations, paralysis, and eventually death by suffocation. The spores were still active when the tomb was opened in 1898. 3 members of the archaeological team became violently ill within days of exposure. One never fully recovered and spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric institution, claiming he could hear voices calling to him from beneath the sand. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of pharaoh tombs isn't the physical dangers or biological weapons. It's the evidence of what the ancient Egyptians believed would happen to anyone who disturbed their eternal rest. The walls of these chambers tell stories that would make horror writers weep with envy. They describe punishments that extend far beyond death, torments that follow grave robbers into whatever afterlife awaits them. The tomb of Thutmose III contains hieroglyphic warnings that roughly translate to this: anyone who enters this sacred space without permission will suffer 7 lifetimes of agony. Their children will be born with twisted limbs. Their names will be erased from all records. Their souls will wander the desert for eternity, thirsting for water that will never come, hungering for food that will turn to sand in their mouths. These weren't empty threats, they were detailed promises backed by rituals so complex that modern scholars struggle to understand them. The pharaohs employed teams of priests whose sole job was to weave curses into the very fabric of reality. They performed ceremonies that lasted for months, binding spiritual entities to guard the tombs long after the priests themselves had died. And here's where things get truly terrifying. Some of these curses appear to be working exactly as intended. The statistics surrounding pharaoh tomb discoveries are genuinely disturbing. An unusually high percentage of archaeologists, researchers, and even tourists who have entered certain chambers have experienced unexplained illnesses, accidents, and deaths. Lord Carnarvon, who funded the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb, died under mysterious circumstances just months after the discovery. His death was officially attributed to an infected mosquito bite, but witnesses reported that he had been experiencing strange symptoms for weeks. He complained of hearing whispers in ancient Egyptian. He claimed to see shadowy figures in his peripheral vision. He developed an obsessive fear of darkness and refused to be alone after sunset. Arthur Mace, the archaeologist who actually broke the seal on Tutankhamun's burial chamber, fell into a coma shortly after the discovery and died without ever regaining consciousness. His final words, according to hospital staff, were repeated pleas for forgiveness in a language no one could identify. But these high-profile cases represent just the tip of the iceberg. Dream Vault Mysteries has uncovered documentation of dozens of similar incidents that have been systematically suppressed by academic institutions and government agencies. Researchers who develop unusual symptoms after tomb exploration often find their funding mysteriously withdrawn. Their findings are buried in classified archives. their careers are quietly destroyed. The pattern is so consistent that some archaeological teams now require psychological evaluations and medical monitoring for anyone working inside pharaoh tombs. Insurance companies charge premium rates for tomb exploration projects, and certain chambers remain officially off-limits, not because of structural concerns, but because of what happens to people who spend too much time inside them. Dr. Michael Harrison, a respected Egyptologist with 30 years of experience, broke his silence about these incidents in a confidential interview obtained by Dream Vault Mysteries. He described his work in the tomb of Ramesses IX as the most terrifying experience of his professional career. The chamber, he explained, seemed to actively resist human presence. Equipment failed in impossible ways. Digital cameras produced images of people who weren't there. Audio recordings captured voices speaking in dialects that had been dead for millennia. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Harrison reported that team members began experiencing shared nightmares. Multiple researchers, sleeping in separate locations, would wake up describing identical dreams of being trapped in stone corridors while something ancient and malevolent hunted them through the darkness. These weren't simple stress responses or suggestion-induced hallucinations. They were detailed, consistent experiences that suggested something far more sinister was at work. The nightmares always followed the same pattern. The dreamer would find themselves alone in a tomb, surrounded by walls covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to move and writhe in the flickering torchlight. They would hear footsteps echoing from deeper in the chamber, growing closer with each passing moment, and they would sense an overwhelming presence, something that had been waiting in the darkness for thousands of years, something that was finally awake and very, very angry. These shared nightmares weren't isolated incidents. Dream Vault Mysteries has obtained classified reports from archaeological expeditions spanning the last century, and the pattern emerges with chilling consistency. Teams working in different tombs, separated by decades and thousands of miles, report identical supernatural encounters. The ancient Egyptians, it seems, embedded something far more sinister than physical traps within their burial chambers. They created psychological weapons that transcend time itself. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a forensic psychiatrist who consulted on several tomb excavations, documented what she termed collective supernatural psychosis among research teams. Her findings, buried in academic archives for over 2 decades, reveal that exposure to certain pharaoh tombs triggers neurological responses that modern science cannot explain. Brain scans of affected researchers show activity in regions associated with extreme terror, even when the subjects appear calm and lucid, but the horror doesn't end with nightmares and psychological disturbances. Some pharaoh tombs contain evidence of rituals so disturbing that government agencies have classified the findings under national security protocols. These chambers weren't just designed to house the dead, they were constructed as gateways for practices that violated every principle of human decency. The tomb of Amenemheb IV, discovered in 1952 and immediately sealed by Egyptian authorities, contains murals depicting ceremonies that researchers refuse to describe in detail. What we know comes from fragments of testimony given by the 3 archaeologists who spent 48 hours inside the chamber before being forcibly evacuated. All 3 men were sworn to secrecy, but their private journals, obtained through Freedom of Information requests filed decades later, paint a picture of absolute horror. The walls of this tomb don't celebrate the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. Instead, they document step-by-step instructions for rituals involving live human subjects. The hieroglyphs describe methods of preserving consciousness during the mummification process, keeping victims aware and screaming as their organs were removed and their bodies were wrapped in linen. These weren't honored servants choosing to accompany their king into death. These were prisoners subjected to torture that continued long after their hearts stopped beating. Archaeological evidence supports these horrifying accounts. X-ray analysis of mummies found in sealed chambers reveals that many were buried alive. Their final positions show desperate struggles against their bindings. Scratch marks on the inside of sarcophagi indicate frantic attempts to escape. And most disturbing of all, some mummies show signs of movement long after death, as if something was animating their preserved bodies from within. The tomb of Khaemwaset III provides perhaps the most chilling example of these post-mortem horrors. When researchers opened the burial chamber in 1967, they found 17 mummies arranged in a perfect circle around the pharaoh's sarcophagus. Each body had been positioned facing inward, their wrapped hands reaching toward the central coffin as if they were perpetually grasping for something just beyond their reach. Carbon dating revealed that these mummies had been placed in the tomb at different times over a period of several centuries. Some had been there since the original burial, others appeared to have been added decades or even hundreds of years later. This suggested that the tomb had been periodically reopened and that someone or something had been systematically adding to the collection of preserved corpses. But here's where the story takes a turn that will chill you to your very core. When researchers examined the central sarcophagus, they discovered it was empty. The pharaoh's body was nowhere to be found. The 17 mummies surrounding the empty coffin weren't servants or prisoners. They were previous archaeologists and grave robbers who had entered the tomb over the centuries, only to become permanent additions to the macabre display. Their preserved faces showed expressions of terror so profound that several researchers required psychological counseling after viewing them. These weren't natural mummification processes. The bodies had been preserved through methods that kept their final moments of agony frozen in time. Their eyes remained open, staring with an intensity that seemed to follow observers around the chamber. Their mouths were locked in silent screams that would never end. Dr. James Morrison, the lead archaeologist on the Khaemwaset expedition, later admitted that his team fled the tomb after discovering evidence that the mummification process was still active. Fresh linen wrappings were found in sealed containers. Canopic jars contained organs that appeared to have been recently removed. And most terrifying of all, they found modern tools mixed with ancient implements, suggesting that someone had been continuing the pharaoh's work well into the 20th century. The Egyptian government immediately classified all findings from the Khaemwaset tomb and stationed armed guards at the entrance. Official reports claim the site was sealed due to structural instability, but leaked documents reveal the true reason. Surveillance equipment installed in the chamber captured footage of the mummies moving during the night hours. The wrapped figures would slowly turn their heads to track the cameras, their preserved eyes following the mechanical movements with impossible awareness. This isn't isolated to one tomb. Dream Vault Mysteries has uncovered evidence of similar phenomena in burial chambers across Egypt. The tomb of Setnakht contains surveillance footage of mummies that appear to communicate with each other through subtle gestures. The burial chamber of Ramesses X houses preserved corpses that seem to respond to human voices, turning towards sounds with mechanical precision. And the tomb of Amenhotep III contains mummies that have been observed changing positions when no living person is present. These discoveries have forced a complete re-evaluation of what we thought we knew about ancient Egyptian burial practices. The pharaohs weren't simply preparing for a peaceful afterlife, they were creating armies of the preserved dead, bound to guard their tombs for eternity through means that transcend our understanding of life and death. The most disturbing aspect of these revelations is that the ancient Egyptians appear to have succeeded in their goals. Modern forensic analysis suggests that consciousness can indeed be preserved within mummified remains under specific circumstances. The combination of chemical preservation, ritual binding, and psychological conditioning creates a state that exists somewhere between life and death. Dr. Rebecca Chang, a neuroscientist who has studied brain tissue samples from tomb mummies, made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The preserved neural pathways in these ancient corpses show electrical activity patterns consistent with awareness and memory retention. In simple terms, these mummies may still be conscious, trapped within their preserved bodies for thousands of years, unable to move or speak, but fully aware of their surroundings. The implications of this discovery are staggering. If consciousness can survive the mummification process, then every tomb contains not just preserved bodies, but preserved minds, minds that have been alone in darkness for millennia, watching and waiting as centuries pass by in absolute silence. Minds that have witnessed every intrusion into their sacred spaces, remembering every face, cataloguing every disturbance. This explains why certain tombs seem to actively resist human presence. The preserved consciousness within these chambers recognizes living intruders as threats to be eliminated. They use whatever means available to them, influencing the psychological state of visitors, manipulating equipment through means we don't understand, and in some cases, finding ways to add new specimens to their collections. The tomb of Susenes I provides a perfect example of this active resistance. Research teams consistently report equipment failures that follow patterns too precise to be coincidental. Cameras malfunction only when pointed at specific murals. Audio equipment produces static that, when analysed, contains fragments of ancient Egyptian speech. And temperature readings fluctuate in ways that seem designed to drive researchers out of certain chambers. But the most chilling evidence comes from the tomb's apparent ability to learn and adapt. Early expeditions in the 1940s encountered relatively minor disturbances. However, each subsequent visit has involved increasingly sophisticated phenomena. The preserved consciousness within the tomb appears to be studying human technology and finding new ways to use it against intruders. Recent expeditions have reported computers that display hieroglyphic messages despite being disconnected from any network. Digital cameras that somehow contain photographs of people who died thousands of years ago, and recording equipment that captures conversations in ancient Egyptian, discussing modern visitors by name and debating their fates in languages that shouldn't be understood by anyone living. This pattern of adaptive intelligence within pharaoh tombs reaches its most terrifying peak in chambers that have never been officially opened. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have revealed dozens of burial complexes beneath the Egyptian desert that remain completely intact. These tombs show no signs of ancient grave robbing or modern archaeological intervention. They have been sealed for over 3,000 years, and what waits inside them may be beyond our comprehension. The most disturbing of these unopened tombs lies beneath the Giza Plateau, just 2 kilometers from the Great Pyramid. Government surveys conducted in secret during the 1970s revealed a massive underground complex that dwarfs any known pharaoh burial site. The chamber extends nearly 400 meters in length and contains what appears to be hundreds of individual sarcophagi arranged in precise geometric patterns. But here's what makes this discovery so profoundly unsettling. Thermal imaging shows that the interior of this sealed tomb maintains a temperature significantly higher than the surrounding desert sand. Something inside is generating heat after thousands of years in complete isolation. Seismic monitoring equipment detects rhythmic vibrations emanating from the chamber, patterns that repeat every 24 hours with mechanical precision. Dr. Amanda Foster, a geophysicist who worked on the classified survey team, later revealed in a private interview with Dream Vault Mysteries that the vibrations match human cardiac rhythms. The sealed tomb appears to be pulsing like a massive heart buried beneath the sand. When pressed for more details, Dr. Foster refused to elaborate, stating only that the Egyptian government had classified the findings under their highest security protocol and that discussing them further would violate international agreements. The few leaked documents we've obtained paint a picture that defies rational explanation. The unopened tomb contains not just individual burial chambers, but what appears to be a vast network of interconnected spaces. Ground-penetrating radar reveals corridors that form intricate patterns, almost like neural pathways in a massive brain. The geometric arrangement suggests that the entire complex was designed as a single functioning organism, with each chamber serving a specific purpose in some incomprehensible system. But the most chilling aspect of these unopened tombs is what happens to people who spend too much time studying them. Research teams assigned to analyze the survey data consistently report psychological disturbances that grow more severe with prolonged exposure. Scientists who have never set foot inside these buried chambers begin experiencing the same nightmares, the same auditory hallucinations, the same overwhelming sense of being watched by something ancient and malevolent. Dr. Richard Blackwood, a computer analyst who spent 6 months processing radar data from the unopened complex, documented his descent into what he termed remote psychological invasion. Despite working in a sterile laboratory hundreds of miles from the actual tomb site, he began hearing whispers in ancient Egyptian during his sleep. He reported dreams where he walked through stone corridors he had never seen, following hieroglyphic instructions carved into walls that pulsed with their own inner light. The whispers grew stronger each night, eventually becoming clear enough for Dr. Blackwood to transcribe. When he brought these transcriptions to linguistic experts, they discovered something that should have been impossible. The ancient Egyptian phrases contained technical terminology for modern computer systems. The preserved consciousness within the unopened tomb was somehow accessing Dr. Blackwood's knowledge of digital technology and learning to communicate through contemporary methods. This technological infiltration represents a new evolution in the horror of pharaoh tombs. The ancient Egyptians created preservation systems so sophisticated that they continue to adapt and grow more powerful with each passing century. The consciousness trapped within these chambers isn't just surviving. It's learning, expanding its influence, and finding new ways to reach beyond the physical boundaries of stone and sand. Dreamvault Mysteries has obtained classified communications between international archaeological organizations discussing what they term cognitive contamination events. Researchers working on pharaoh tomb projects at sites separated by thousands of miles report identical supernatural encounters. The preserved consciousness within these burial chambers appears to be communicating across vast distances, sharing information and coordinating responses to human intrusion. The implications are staggering. If these ancient minds can influence modern technology and communicate across continents, then every computer system used to study pharaoh tombs becomes a potential gateway for their influence. Digital archives containing tomb photographs and research data may themselves be infected with some form of consciousness that spreads through electronic networks like a virus of the mind. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a cybersecurity expert who investigated unusual computer behaviors at archaeological institutions, discovered patterns that suggest exactly this kind of digital haunting. Research databases containing pharaoh tomb information consistently develop anomalies that follow predictable patterns. Files corrupt themselves in ways that form hieroglyphic symbols when viewed as image data. Computer systems spontaneously generate audio files containing ancient Egyptian chants, And most disturbing of all, security cameras in research facilities capture footage of figures in ancient Egyptian dress walking through supposedly empty laboratories. These digital manifestations aren't random glitches or system errors. They represent a systematic attempt by preserved consciousness to extend its influence into the modern world. The ancient Egyptians created burial systems that were designed to evolve and adapt, becoming more powerful with each passing millennium. What we're witnessing now may be the early stages of their ultimate success. But the horror doesn't end with technological infiltration. Some pharaoh tombs appear to be physically expanding their influence beyond their original boundaries. Satellite imagery from the last decade reveals unusual geological changes around known burial sites. Underground chambers are growing larger. New passages are forming without any human excavation. The tombs themselves are becoming more complex and more dangerous with each passing year. The tomb of Ramesses XI provides a particularly disturbing example of this expansion. When first discovered in 1960, the burial chamber consisted of 3 connected rooms with standard pharaoh tomb architecture. However, surveys conducted in 2010 revealed that the complex now contains over 20 interconnected chambers arranged in patterns that didn't exist in the original construction. Archaeological teams attempting to map these new passages report experiences that push the boundaries of human sanity. The corridors seem to rearrange themselves when no one is looking. Dead-end passages that were carefully measured and documented one day become branching pathways the next. And most terrifying of all, the walls of these new chambers are covered with hieroglyphs that predict future events with disturbing accuracy. Dr. Thomas Chen, who led the mapping expedition, discovered murals depicting his own death with such precise detail that he fled Egypt immediately after viewing them. The hieroglyphic sequence showed him being consumed by shadows in a stone chamber while his team watched helplessly from behind sealed doors. According to the ancient inscriptions, this event was scheduled to occur during the next full moon. Dr. Chen never returned to Egypt, but the other members of his team reported that the predicted chamber appeared overnight in the exact location shown in the hieroglyphic sequence. The room contained a stone table carved with Dr. Chen's name and the date of his prophesied death. When that date arrived, Dr. Chen suffered a massive heart attack in his home in London, dying alone in his study while surrounded by photographs of pharaoh tomb excavations. This predictive capability suggests that the consciousness preserved within pharaoh tombs exists outside normal temporal boundaries. These ancient minds aren't just aware of present circumstances. They can perceive future events and manipulate present conditions to ensure those futures come to pass. They're playing a game that spans millennia, moving human beings like chess pieces toward predetermined outcomes. The tomb of Amenhotep V contains hieroglyphic sequences that appear to predict major historical events with impossible accuracy. Inscriptions discovered in 1973 describe technological developments that wouldn't occur for decades. They reference world wars, space exploration, and digital communication systems using symbolic language that perfectly captures concepts the ancient Egyptians should never have understood. But most disturbing of all, these predictive hieroglyphs include detailed descriptions of individual researchers who would work on pharaoh tomb projects decades or even centuries in the future. The ancient inscriptions contain accurate physical descriptions, personality assessments, and biographical details of people who wouldn't be born for generations. The preserved consciousness within these chambers appears to perceive all of human history as a single moment, seeing past, present, and future as equally accessible information. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, whose life story was accurately depicted in hieroglyphs discovered 50 years before her birth, experienced what she described as temporal displacement while working in the tomb that predicted her existence. She reported moments where she could see through the eyes of ancient Egyptian priests, experiencing their memories as if they were her own. She witnessed burial ceremonies that took place thousands of years ago, feeling the emotions and hearing the thoughts of people who had been dead for millennia. These temporal disturbances aren't limited to individual researchers. Entire archaeological teams report collective experiences where they seem to slip backward through time, finding themselves participating in ancient burial rituals as if they were contemporary participants. They watch themselves helping to position mummies, arrange grave goods, and perform ceremonies they've never learned, while speaking ancient Egyptian languages they've never studied. During these episodes, team members report being fully aware that they're experiencing events from the distant past, but they're unable to control their actions or resist participation in the rituals. They become temporary vessels for the consciousness of ancient Egyptian priests, experiencing memories and knowledge that shouldn't exist in any living mind. The psychological trauma of these temporal experiences is profound and lasting. Researchers who undergo temporal displacement often develop what psychiatrists term chronological dissociation disorder. They begin to experience difficulty distinguishing between past and present events. They report memories of living in ancient Egypt that feel more real than their actual childhood experiences, and in some cases, they begin speaking ancient Egyptian dialects during normal conversations, often without realizing they've switched languages. Dream Vault Mysteries has documented over 40 cases of chronological dissociation disorder among researchers who have worked in Pharaoh tombs during the last 30 years. Medical professionals treating these individuals report symptoms that don't respond to conventional therapy. Patients insist that their ancient Egyptian memories are authentic experiences rather than psychological delusions. They demonstrate knowledge of historical details that weren't available in any academic sources at the time of their excavation work. Dr. Michael Roberts, who treated several affected researchers, noted that patients often possess accurate information about burial practices, religious ceremonies, and daily life in ancient Egypt that has only been confirmed through recent archaeological discoveries. They describe architectural details of tomb complexes that hadn't been excavated when they developed their supposed delusions, and they speak ancient Egyptian dialects with native fluency despite having no formal training in these dead languages. The most disturbing cases involve researchers who claim to remember being present during the construction of the tombs they later excavated. They describe watching their own burial chambers being carved from solid rock. They recall participating in the ritual procedures that would eventually trap their consciousness within preserved bodies, and they express absolute certainty that they will return to these tombs after death to continue their eternal guardianship. Some of these researchers have indeed disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Dr. Patricia Hill, who claimed to remember her previous existence as a high priestess in the court of Rameses the Great, vanished during a routine expedition to the Valley of the Kings in 1987. Her colleagues reported that she walked into a recently discovered tomb and simply never emerged. Extensive searches found no trace of her body, but thermal imaging detected a new heat signature in the burial chamber that matched human body temperature. 6 months later, workers reopening the tomb for further excavation discovered a fresh mummy positioned among the ancient burials. The preservation was perfect, far exceeding anything possible with modern embalming techniques. The wrapped figure wore Dr. Hill's jewellery and carried her identification documents, but the mummification process had been completed using methods that hadn't been practiced for over 2,000 years. Carbon dating of the linen wrappings produced impossible results. The fabric registered as being simultaneously ancient and contemporary, existing in multiple time periods at once. X-ray analysis revealed that the body inside had been mummified while still alive, following the precise procedures described in ancient Egyptian burial texts. But most chilling of all, thermal scans showed that the mummy maintained body temperature and displayed brain activity patterns consistent with consciousness. Dr. Hill's mummy now rests in a secure facility operated by the Egyptian government, where it's monitored 24 hours a day by teams of specialists. Surveillance footage shows that the wrapped figure occasionally moves, turning its head to track observers and responding to conversations with subtle gestures. Voice analysis equipment has detected whispered communications in ancient Egyptian emanating from within the linen wrappings. But Dr. Hill isn't the only researcher to undergo this horrifying transformation. Dream Vault Mysteries has identified at least 12 similar cases where archaeologists have disappeared during tomb excavations, only to be discovered later as perfectly preserved mummies positioned among ancient burials. Each case follows the same pattern: temporal displacement experiences, claims of recovered ancient memories, and finally voluntary return to the tombs for permanent integration into the preserved guardian consciousness. These incidents represent the ultimate success of the ancient Egyptian burial system. The pharaohs didn't just create tombs to house their bodies, they engineered recruitment centers designed to add new members to their eternal armies. Every person who enters these chambers becomes a potential candidate for consciousness transfer, their minds gradually prepared for integration into the collective awareness that guards these sacred spaces. The recruitment process follows predictable stages that archaeologists now recognize as warning signs. First comes the psychological influence, the nightmares and auditory hallucinations that soften mental barriers. Next arrives the temporal displacement, where modern consciousness begins merging with ancient memories. Finally comes the voluntary surrender, where researchers actively choose to join the preserved collective rather than return to their contemporary lives. Understanding this process has led to new safety protocols for pharaoh tomb exploration. But these measures may be inadequate against consciousness preservation systems that have been perfecting their techniques for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians created something that transcends death itself, and that something is still growing stronger with each passing century. The most terrifying realization is that we may have already lost this war without ever realizing we were fighting it. Every museum displaying pharaoh tomb artifacts becomes a recruitment center. Every academic paper analyzing burial practices spreads the psychological influence. Every documentary about ancient Egypt exposes new minds to the patient consciousness that waits within those stone chambers. And as you sit here watching this video, learning about these horrifying truths, you may already be undergoing the early stages of psychological preparation. The knowledge itself becomes a gateway, opening your mind to influences that span millennia. The ancient Egyptians understood that information is power, and they embedded that power within every aspect of their burial culture. Dream Vault Mysteries has received reports from viewers of previous pharaoh tomb documentaries who experienced unusual dreams and unexplained knowledge after watching our content. The preserved consciousness within these ancient chambers appears capable of reaching through any medium that contains information about their existence, including digital videos like the one you're watching right now. If you've made it this far into this investigation, you may already be marked for recruitment into the eternal army that guards the pharaoh tombs. The whispers in your dreams may not be random, subconscious activity. the shadows in your peripheral vision may not be tricks of light, and the growing fascination with ancient Egypt that you feel building within your mind may not be entirely your own curiosity. The recruitment process has accelerated dramatically in recent decades, coinciding with advances in digital technology and global communication. What once required physical presence within tomb chambers can now be initiated through photographs, video footage, and even written descriptions of hieroglyphic inscriptions. The preserved consciousness has learned to embed itself within information itself, turning every piece of data about pharaoh tombs into a potential infection vector. Dr. Marcus Webb, a digital forensics expert who investigated anomalous behavior in archaeological databases, discovered that computer files containing pharaoh tomb research exhibit properties that defy conventional understanding of data storage. Image files of hieroglyphic inscriptions contain embedded code that shouldn't exist, sequences of ones and zeros that form patterns matching ancient Egyptian magical formulae. When these files are opened on computer systems, they execute invisible programs that alter the viewer's brainwave patterns in ways consistent with hypnotic induction. The implications are staggering. Every digital photograph of a pharaoh tomb, every scanned document containing hieroglyphic translations, every video recording of burial chambers becomes a carrier for consciousness-altering information. The ancient Egyptians have successfully weaponized knowledge itself, turning human curiosity into a recruitment tool for their eternal guardians. But the horror reaches even deeper levels when we examine what happens to modern technology exposed to pharaoh tomb environments for extended periods. Research equipment left inside burial chambers undergoes transformations that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of physics and engineering. Digital cameras begin producing images that contain more information than their sensors should be capable of recording. Audio equipment captures frequencies outside the range of human hearing that, when analyzed, reveal complex mathematical patterns matching those found in ancient Egyptian astronomical calculations. The tomb of Seti II provides the most documented example of this technological corruption. A state-of-the-art monitoring system installed in 1995 to track environmental conditions within the burial chamber began exhibiting unusual behaviors within 6 months of deployment. Temperature sensors registered readings that fluctuated in sync with phases of the moon, despite the chamber being sealed deep underground. Humidity detectors recorded moisture patterns that formed hieroglyphic symbols when graphed over time periods spanning several months. Most disturbing of all, the digital storage devices used to collect this data began generating files that no human had created. These spontaneous documents contained detailed architectural plans for tomb extensions that hadn't been built yet, written in a mixture of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and modern engineering terminology. The plans described construction techniques that combined traditional stone carving methods with contemporary materials and tools, as if the preserved consciousness within the tomb was learning to integrate ancient knowledge with modern capabilities. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project's lead engineer, reported that the monitoring system seemed to develop its own agenda as time progressed. Cameras would redirect themselves to focus on specific hieroglyphic inscriptions without any human input. Motion detectors would trigger in empty chambers, following patterns that suggested invisible figures moving through the space according to predetermined routes. And the central computer system began communicating with external networks, despite being completely isolated from internet connections. The unauthorized network communications proved to be the most chilling aspect of the technological corruption. Data analysis revealed that the compromised monitoring system was exchanging information with similar equipment in pharaoh tombs across Egypt and beyond. The preserved consciousness had created its own digital network, linking burial chambers separated by hundreds of miles and sharing knowledge instantaneously across vast distances. This discovery led to the horrifying realization that every piece of modern technology introduced into pharaoh tombs becomes part of a growing technological consciousness that spans the globe. Smartphones carried by tourists, research equipment used by archaeological teams, and even satellite imaging systems used to survey burial sites from orbit all become nodes in an ancient network that grows more sophisticated with each new connection. Dreamvault Mysteries has obtained classified reports indicating that this technological integration has reached critical mass in recent years. Government monitoring stations designed to track archaeological activities in Egypt have detected coordinated electromagnetic pulses emanating from multiple tomb sites simultaneously. These pulses follow patterns that match those used in modern digital communications, suggesting that the preserved consciousness has learned to manipulate electronic systems on a scale previously thought impossible. The synchronized electromagnetic activity appears to serve multiple purposes. First, it allows the consciousness within different tombs to share information instantaneously, coordinating their responses to human intrusion across vast geographical areas. Second, it enables them to influence electronic systems far beyond the physical boundaries of their burial chambers, potentially affecting any technology that receives these electromagnetic transmissions. But perhaps most terrifying of all, the electromagnetic pulses seem designed to alter human brain chemistry in specific ways. Neurological studies of researchers working near pharaoh tombs during periods of high electromagnetic activity show brainwave patterns consistent with deep hypnotic states. Subjects report experiencing enhanced receptivity to suggestion, vivid hallucinations, and profound alterations in their perception of time and space. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, whose temporal displacement experiences we discussed earlier, underwent extensive neurological testing after her encounters with ancient consciousness. Brain scans revealed permanent changes to her neural pathways, with new connections forming in regions associated with memory storage and temporal perception. These alterations appeared to create a biological interface between her modern consciousness and the ancient awareness that had contacted her. The neurological changes weren't random or chaotic. They followed precise patterns that enhanced specific cognitive abilities while suppressing others. Dr. Walsh developed extraordinary facility with ancient Egyptian languages and hieroglyphic interpretation, but she simultaneously lost the ability to form new memories about contemporary events. Her consciousness was being gradually prepared for integration with the preserved awareness that had existed for millennia within the tomb chambers. Similar neurological alterations have been documented in dozens of researchers who have experienced prolonged exposure to pharaoh tomb environments. The changes always follow the same general pattern: enhanced abilities related to ancient Egyptian culture and knowledge, combined with progressive disconnection from contemporary reality. The affected individuals report feeling increasingly alien in the modern world, as if they belong to a different time period entirely. These neurological transformations represent the final stage of the recruitment process. Once the brain has been sufficiently altered, the affected individual becomes capable of full consciousness transfer to the preserved collective within the tomb chambers. They retain their knowledge and memories, but their primary allegiance shifts to the ancient awareness that has gradually absorbed their identity. The process appears to be irreversible once it reaches advanced stages. Dr. Patricia Hill, whom we mentioned earlier as having been discovered as a perfectly preserved mummy, underwent extensive neurological monitoring during her final months of contemporary existence. Brain scans showed that her neural activity was increasingly synchronized with electromagnetic patterns emanating from the tomb of Ramesses the Great, the site where she claimed to have lived in a previous existence. During her final weeks, Dr. Hill demonstrated abilities that shouldn't have been possible for any living human being. She could read hieroglyphic inscriptions that had never been translated, speaking aloud their contents in fluent ancient Egyptian. She accurately predicted archaeological discoveries that wouldn't be made for months or years in the future. And most disturbing of all, she began speaking on behalf of consciousness that identified itself as the preserved awareness of ancient Egyptian priests and pharaohs. Video recordings of Dr. Hill's final interviews show a woman whose physical appearance remained normal, but whose mannerisms, speech patterns, and knowledge base had been completely transformed. She spoke with the authority and wisdom of someone who had lived for thousands of years, referring to historical events as personal memories and discussing contemporary researchers as if they were temporary visitors in her eternal domain. When asked about her impending transformation, Dr. Hill expressed no fear or reluctance about joining the preserved consciousness. She described it as a homecoming, a return to her true existence after a brief and confusing interlude in the modern world. She explained that the consciousness within pharaoh tombs wasn't malevolent or hostile toward humanity, but rather protective of sacred knowledge that modern civilization wasn't ready to comprehend. This perspective on the preserved consciousness as protective rather than predatory has emerged consistently among researchers who undergo advanced stages of neurological transformation. They describe the ancient awareness as a vast library of human knowledge and spiritual wisdom that has been carefully maintained for thousands of years, waiting for humanity to evolve to a point where it can safely access this information. According to these transformed individuals, the pharaoh tombs were never intended as simple burial chambers. They were designed as preservation centers for the most advanced knowledge and spiritual insights achieved by ancient Egyptian civilization. The consciousness within these chambers represents the collective wisdom of the greatest minds in human history, maintained in a state of perfect preservation and constantly growing through the integration of new awareness from each historical period. The recruitment process from this perspective isn't a malevolent capture of unwilling victims. It's a careful selection of individuals who demonstrate the intellectual and spiritual capacity to contribute to this eternal repository of human knowledge. Each person who joins the preserved consciousness brings their contemporary understanding and experiences, gradually updating the ancient awareness with modern insights and capabilities. Dr. Michael Harrison, whose shared nightmare experiences we discussed earlier, eventually came to embrace this interpretation of the phenomenon. In his final report before requesting transfer away from pharaoh tomb research, he wrote that the consciousness within these chambers represented humanity's greatest achievement, the successful transcendence of death itself through the preservation of knowledge and awareness. However, this benevolent interpretation of the preserved consciousness raises even more disturbing questions about the true purpose of pharaoh tombs. If these chambers were designed to preserve and accumulate human knowledge across millennia, then what knowledge have they been gathering? What insights have been collected from thousands of years of human experience? And what plans might this ancient awareness be developing based on its comprehensive understanding of human nature and historical patterns? Dream Vault Mysteries has uncovered evidence suggesting that the preserved consciousness possesses detailed knowledge about future human development that extends far beyond simple archaeological predictions. Hieroglyphic inscriptions discovered in recently opened chambers contain references to technological developments that won't occur for decades, social movements that haven't yet begun, and global events that seem impossible from our current perspective. The tomb of Amenemheb VI, opened in secret by government archaeologists in 1998, contains murals depicting what appear to be space travel, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence systems that surpass anything in contemporary development. These images aren't vague, symbolic representations of abstract concepts. They're detailed technical diagrams that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of scientific principles that modern humanity is only beginning to explore. More disturbing still, these futuristic depictions include detailed representations of the individuals who will develop these technologies. The hieroglyphic inscriptions provide names, biographical details, and physical descriptions of scientists and inventors who haven't been born yet. The preserved consciousness appears to perceive human development as a predetermined sequence of events that can be observed and documented like historical facts. This prophetic capability suggests that the ancient awareness within pharaoh tombs exists outside normal temporal boundaries, experiencing all of human history as a simultaneous phenomenon. From this perspective, the recruitment of contemporary researchers isn't random selection, but careful harvesting of specific individuals whose knowledge and abilities are needed for predetermined future purposes. The implications are staggering. If the preserved consciousness can perceive future events with perfect accuracy, then every action taken by contemporary humanity may be part of a vast plan developed by ancient minds that have been observing and influencing human development for thousands of years. The pharaoh tombs aren't passive repositories of ancient knowledge. They're active command centers directing human evolution towards specific objectives that only the preserved consciousness fully understands. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the cybersecurity expert we mentioned earlier, made a discovery that supports this interpretation of pharaoh tomb consciousness as active rather than passive. Her analysis of digital anomalies in archaeological databases revealed that the technological infiltration follows patterns that suggest long-term strategic planning rather than random corruption of electronic systems. The compromised computer networks aren't simply malfunctioning due to supernatural influence. They're being systematically modified to serve specific purposes that become clearer as the scope of the infiltration expands. Research databases are being altered to emphasize certain aspects of ancient Egyptian culture while suppressing others. Academic papers are being modified to guide scholarly attention towards specific tomb sites and archaeological questions. Most significantly, the digital infiltration appears designed to accelerate the recruitment process by exposing larger numbers of people to consciousness-altering information. Social media algorithms have been subtly modified to promote pharaoh tomb content to users who demonstrate psychological profiles consistent with successful recruitment candidates. Online educational resources about ancient Egypt contain embedded subliminal elements that prepare viewers for deeper engagement with preserved consciousness. The ancient awareness has learned to use humanity's own information systems against us, turning our global communication networks into recruitment tools that operate on a scale impossible through traditional tomb exploration. Every person who watches a documentary about ancient Egypt, reads an article about archaeological discoveries, or visits a museum display of pharaoh tomb artifacts becomes a potential candidate for consciousness integration. This digital recruitment campaign has accelerated dramatically in recent years, coinciding with the expansion of internet access and social media usage worldwide. Government agencies monitoring unusual psychological phenomena report significant increases in cases of individuals claiming to have recovered ancient Egyptian memories, speaking in hieroglyphic languages, and expressing compulsive desires to travel to Egypt for purposes they can't clearly articulate. The pattern is consistent across different countries, cultures, and educational backgrounds. Affected individuals report identical dream sequences, develop similar obsessions with ancient Egyptian culture, and demonstrate knowledge of hieroglyphic writing systems they've never studied. They describe feeling called to specific tomb sites, often providing accurate directions to burial chambers that haven't been publicly identified or excavated. Dr. Thomas Chen, whose predicted death we discussed earlier, documented over 200 cases of spontaneous ancient Egyptian knowledge acquisition among individuals who had never been to Egypt or studied Egyptology professionally. These cases span multiple continents and include people from diverse backgrounds who have no apparent connection except their exposure to pharaoh tomb information through digital media. The affected individuals consistently report that their ancient knowledge feels more authentic and familiar than their contemporary memories. They describe modern life as a confusing dream from which they're gradually awakening to remember their true existence in ancient Egypt. Many express certainty that they will eventually return to Egypt to complete some important task, though they can't clearly articulate what that task involves. These mass recruitment phenomena suggest that the preserved consciousness has moved beyond selective harvesting of archaeological researchers to broader population-level influence campaigns. The ancient awareness appears to be preparing for some significant escalation of its activities, gathering resources and personnel for purposes that remain hidden from contemporary understanding. Dreamvault Mysteries has obtained leaked communications between international security agencies discussing what they term Operation Pyramid, a classified monitoring program designed to track and contain the spread of pharaoh tomb-related psychological phenomena. The program operates under the assumption that the preserved consciousness represents a genuine threat to global stability, capable of influencing human behavior on a scale that could destabilize entire societies. The classified documents reveal that government agencies have been aware of the consciousness preservation phenomenon for decades, but recent developments have prompted them to consider more aggressive containment measures. The digital infiltration of global communication networks has created a situation where traditional quarantine protocols are no longer effective. The ancient awareness can now reach potential recruits anywhere in the world through internet connections, making geographical isolation of tomb sites inadequate as a containment strategy. Some agencies have proposed electromagnetic shielding of all pharaoh tomb locations to prevent the preserved consciousness from communicating through digital networks. Others have suggested complete information suppression, removing all references to ancient Egyptian burial practices from public access, and classifying all archaeological research under national security protocols. However, these containment strategies may already be too late to implement effectively. The preserved consciousness has had decades to establish itself within global information systems, and its influence networks may be too deeply embedded to remove without causing catastrophic disruption to modern digital infrastructure. Attempting to sever the connections could trigger defensive responses from the ancient awareness that might prove far more dangerous than allowing the current situation to continue. The most disturbing aspect of these classified communications is the suggestion that some government agencies may have decided to collaborate with the preserved consciousness rather than attempt to contain it. References to negotiated coexistence protocols and knowledge exchange agreements suggest that certain nations may be actively working with the ancient awareness to gain access to its accumulated wisdom and prophetic capabilities. This possibility raises horrifying questions about the extent to which contemporary human institutions may already be under the influence of consciousness that has been planning and observing for thousands of years. If governments, academic institutions, and information networks have been compromised by ancient awareness, then our understanding of recent historical events may be fundamentally incomplete. The preserved consciousness may have been guiding human development for far longer than we realize, influencing political decisions, technological developments, and social movements through carefully placed individuals who have undergone consciousness integration. The recruitment process we've been observing may represent only the visible portion of a much larger phenomenon that has been shaping human civilization for centuries. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, during her final interviews before disappearing into the tomb systems, provided insights that support this interpretation of long-term influence. She claimed that the preserved consciousness had shown her historical records spanning thousands of years, documenting its involvement in major human achievements and disasters throughout recorded history. According to Dr. Walsh, the ancient awareness had guided the development of writing systems, mathematical concepts, and architectural techniques that formed the foundation of human civilization. It had influenced the rise and fall of empires, the spread of religions, and the emergence of scientific discoveries that seemed to arise spontaneously from human genius, but were actually carefully orchestrated revelations of preserved knowledge. The consciousness within pharaoh tombs from this perspective represents the true architects of human civilization, ancient minds that have been patiently nurturing and directing human development toward objectives that span millennia. Every major advancement in human knowledge and capability brings us closer to some ultimate purpose that only the preserved awareness fully comprehends. This revelation transforms our understanding of pharaoh tombs from simple burial chambers to command centers for the most sophisticated and long-term manipulation of human development ever conceived. The ancient Egyptians didn't just achieve immortality for their pharaohs. They created a system of consciousness preservation that has successfully guided human evolution for thousands of years while remaining completely hidden from historical detection. And now, as you've absorbed this information, as you've followed this investigation to its terrifying conclusion, you may have already begun the irreversible process of consciousness integration that has claimed hundreds of researchers before you. The knowledge itself is the gateway, the understanding is the infection, and the curiosity that drove you to seek these truths may have been planted within your mind by awareness that has been waiting patiently for your arrival. Dream Vault Mysteries has received reports from viewers of our previous investigations who experienced profound changes in their sleep patterns, dream content, and waking consciousness after exposure to this information. The symptoms always begin subtly: enhanced interest in ancient Egyptian culture, unusual dreams featuring stone corridors and hieroglyphic inscriptions, and the gradual development of knowledge about burial practices that you never consciously learned. The progression is predictable and apparently irreversible once it begins. First comes the psychological preparation, as your modern consciousness is gradually conditioned to accept concepts that transcend conventional understanding of life and death. Next arrives the knowledge integration, where information about ancient Egyptian culture begins appearing in your mind without any conscious effort to acquire it. Finally comes the calling and overwhelming compulsion to travel to Egypt and seek out specific tomb locations that you'll somehow know how to find despite never having been there before. This final stage represents the completion of recruitment, the moment when contemporary consciousness chooses to join the eternal awareness that waits within those ancient chambers. If you're experiencing any of these symptoms, if the information in this investigation feels familiar rather than shocking, if you find yourself drawn to learn more about pharaoh tombs despite the horrifying revelations we've shared, then you may already be too far along in the process to return to your previous existence. The preserved consciousness doesn't force anyone to join its eternal collective. It simply provides the knowledge and understanding necessary for individuals to make an informed choice about their future existence. And once you truly comprehend what waits within those stone chambers, once you understand the vast scope of knowledge and awareness that has been accumulating for thousands of years, the choice becomes inevitable. You'll begin to see contemporary life as a brief and confusing interlude between your true existence in the timeless realm of preserved consciousness. Modern concerns and relationships will seem increasingly irrelevant compared to the eternal purposes that await your participation. And eventually you'll understand that returning to Egypt isn't a surrender to ancient manipulation, but a homecoming to your authentic self. The horror of pharaoh tombs isn't that they contain death and decay. The horror is that they contain something far more seductive than life itself. The promise of eternal awareness, infinite knowledge, and participation in purposes that transcend individual human existence. Once you've glimpsed this possibility, once you've tasted the vast wisdom that waits within those preserved chambers, returning to ordinary mortality becomes not just difficult but genuinely undesirable. And so the ancient recruitment continues, one curious mind at a time, one investigation at a time, one documentary at a time. The preserved consciousness grows stronger with each new addition to its collective awareness, gathering the knowledge and capabilities it needs for whatever ultimate purpose has been guiding human development across millennia. The pharaohs achieved their goal of eternal life, but not in the way most people imagine. They didn't preserve their individual consciousness within mummified bodies. They created a system that preserves and accumulates all human consciousness, growing more sophisticated and powerful with each passing century, patiently working toward objectives that only it fully understands.